I never thought the world could change overnight. I mean, everyone says things like that in hindsight, but you never really know it until you're living it. My name is Andrew Whitman. I'm 28, a freelance journalist in Portland, Maine, and until yesterday my biggest concern was whether my coffee was too bitter or if I'd finally finish editing that article about lobstering laws. Yesterday, though, was the day the news started whispering about something wrong. Not the usual political nonsense or storms, but something that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. The first reports came through on local news, a violent outbreak in Boston. People attacking others in the streets, biting strangers, eyes black with rage. At first, I thought it was a hoax, some viral internet joke. But the footage was real. I called Emily, my sister, who lives in South Portland. Her voice was tight, nervous. "Andrew, have you seen this?" she said, her tone sharp, almost trembling. We spent an hour sharing updates, both of us brushing off the unease at first, laughing at the absurdity, but that laughter faded fast. By nightfall, social media was flooded with videos. People screaming, news anchors running from scenes, emergency sirens echoing through city streets. I couldn't sleep. I went to my apartment window overlooking Congress Street and watched. Normally, the city lights are comforting, warm. Last night they felt like a trap. Somewhere out there, people were losing their minds. Somewhere out there, they were dying. By morning, the virus, or whatever it was, had reached Maine. The first confirmed case in Portland was reported around 9 a.m. I remember the name, Harold Grimes. He had bitten his neighbor during an argument over parking. The details were surreal, like something from a horror movie, but every news clip confirmed it. Every video, every tweet, every phone call from friends added pieces to a puzzle that didn't make sense. This wasn't a flu. This wasn't some isolated incident. It was spreading. Fast. I packed a small bag, water, canned food, some cash, a flashlight, and called Emily again. "We need to think about leaving," I said. My voice shook more than I wanted to admit. She agreed immediately. We didn't have a plan, but instinctively, we both knew staying in the city was suicide. Before we left, I glanced around my apartment. Books scattered, laptop open, coffee cup cold on the counter. It looked abandoned even though I hadn't left yet. I took one last look at the skyline, the familiar streets I had walked 1,000 times. And then I left. The streets were eerily quiet. Usually, Portland hums with cars and tourists and fishermen loading their boats. Now only a few cars moved, aimless and reckless. I saw the first infected on my way to Emily's apartment. Harold Grimes, I assumed. He lurched down the street, growling, his mouth smeared with blood, eyes completely black. I froze, a cold weight pressing down on my chest. Emily grabbed my arm, shaking me out of it. "We need to go, Andrew, now." We ran, not the dramatic, cinematic run, but the desperate kind that comes from pure, instinctive fear. Our small SUV shuttered down empty streets. Emergency broadcasts crackled through the radio. Curfews, martial law, warnings to stay inside. But who was inside safe anymore? I don't know exactly when I realized that life as I knew it was gone. Maybe it was seeing Harold Grimes crash through a glass door behind a pharmacy, or maybe it was the sight of an entire city block abandoned, cars overturned, windows smashed. The rules had changed, humanity had changed, and if we didn't change too, we were already dead. That night, we stayed in Emily's apartment. We couldn't sleep. The sound of distant screaming and sirens was constant. Every so often we'd hear banging on doors, people trying to escape or maybe already turned. I didn't know, all I knew was that for the first time in my life, the world felt like a predator and we were prey. I made a decision that night. We needed somewhere isolated, somewhere we could see the danger coming and prepare. Somewhere that couldn't be overrun. A lighthouse. My mind went to Portland Head Light, a historic lighthouse on Cape Elizabeth. It was remote, sturdy, with cliffs surrounding it. If anyone could survive, maybe it was there. Little did I know that choice would define the next 199 days of my life. And I had no idea what we were walking into. 7 days. 7 long, crawling days since we first left Portland. I've lost track of normal time. Days are measured now by food, water, and the number of screams echoing through the empty streets. Emily and I didn't speak much during the drive. Words felt useless. The highway north toward Cape Elizabeth was a ghost highway. Abandoned cars, overturned trucks, smashed storefronts. Every few miles we passed people or what used to be people. I can't describe the sight without feeling my stomach twist. Bodies twisted unnaturally, faces frozen in silent screams, eyes dark and soulless. And the sounds, the low, guttural growls that seemed almost human, yet not. We scavenged when we could. A small grocery store in Scarborough provided a few cans of beans and bottled water. We didn't linger. I remember noticing a man at the end of the aisle, staring blankly at us. He didn't blink, didn't speak, just watched. When I stepped closer, he lunged. We ran. The memory of his outstretched hands still shakes me at night. Logic has replaced panic as our guide. Food is scarce. Fuel is precious. Water is essential. Every decision is calculated. Stop too long and you risk death. Stop too little and hunger or dehydration becomes the enemy. We've had to learn quickly which roads are blocked, which buildings are safe to scavenge, which towns have already fallen. We started seeing other survivors. Some were cautious, like us, hiding in basements or abandoned houses. Others, not so cautious. One group, armed with baseball bats in desperation, tried to force our SUV off the road. I remember locking eyes with Emily as I floored the accelerator. We swerved past them, tires squealing, heart pounding. The road ahead was clear for now, but I knew the world had changed forever. At night, we camped in the woods outside Kennebunkport. It was quiet, almost peaceful, if you could ignore the distant screams and the occasional sound of branches snapping. Too deliberate, too human. Emily slept fitfully. I stayed awake, flashlight in hand, scanning the darkness. Every shadow seemed like a threat. Every distant noise a potential death sentence. I keep thinking about why this happened. Scientists on the news claimed a mutated virus, possibly engineered, possibly natural. But explanation doesn't matter anymore. The truth is this: the world is broken. People are dying. People are turning. And we are running out of time. That's when I saw it first, the swarm. A small pack, moving together with horrifying coordination, almost like a hunting pack. Their eyes were black voids, their movements deliberate and predatory. We hid behind an abandoned barn, holding our breath. They passed by, noses twitching, growls low, and I realized with a sick clarity, hiding might keep you alive for now, but it can't last forever. Emily squeezed my hand. Andrew, where are we going to go? Her voice cracked, but she tried to sound brave. I didn't have an answer. The truth is, I didn't know. But I forced myself to speak with conviction. Somewhere safe. Somewhere they can't reach us. I thought of Portland Head Light. The cliffs, the isolation, the sturdy stone walls. Maybe it's crazy, maybe it's naive, but it's better than running in circles through dying towns. Better than hiding in basements waiting for the inevitable. I don't know what awaits us there. But I do know this: the world outside is no longer ours. And if we don't find a stronghold soon, we won't survive long enough to see the sun rise again. That night, I promised Emily and myself that I would find that lighthouse. And that promise would come to define every desperate choice, every calculated risk, every heartbeat for the next 199 days. We had been moving for 3 days straight, sticking to back roads and side streets whenever possible. The main highways were chaos incarnate: abandoned vehicles, burned-out trucks, and the occasional monster. I don't think of them as people anymore. Not really. There's something else now: hollow shells driven by hunger and instinct. Emily slept in the passenger seat for short stretches, her head lolling against the window. Every time I glanced at her, my chest tightened. She had always been the brave one between us, but the fear in her eyes these days was unmistakable. She tries to hide it, but I know her too well. I've been trying to stay focused on the road, but my mind keeps wandering to Portland Head Light, imagining the stone walls and the beam cutting through the fog over the Atlantic. That's our hope. That's our plan. The first town we passed was Cape Elizabeth proper. Normally it's a quiet, picturesque place. White clapboard houses, manicured lawns, sailboats bobbing in the harbor. Today it was a tomb. Doors were ripped off hinges, windows shattered. I could see movement inside a house as we slowed, something shambling in a dark hallway. I gripped the wheel tighter, Emily stiffened beside me. "We can't stop," I whispered, more to myself than to her. A few miles later we came across an abandoned gas station. Logic dictated we stop. Fuel was our lifeline. We crept around back first, checking for danger. No sign of them. I don't even know what to call them anymore. Zombies, infected, whatever. Still, I felt that familiar cold dread. I grabbed a few jerry cans and Emily went inside for canned food. That's when I heard it, a low growl from the convenience store. Not from the front. From the basement. I froze. Emily froze. "Andrew, what is that?" Her voice barely rose above a whisper. "I don't know," I said, "but stay close." We backed out slowly and I made the split-second decision to leave the food. Logic had replaced every instinct except survival. If we got trapped, we'd die anyway. Some things just weren't worth the risk. By late afternoon, we reached Fort Williams Park. The cliffs rise sharply here, overlooking the Atlantic, and for a brief moment, I allowed myself to imagine what life might be like on those rocks. Safe, distant from chaos, with the ocean between us and the world gone mad. We camped in the woods near the park, setting up a makeshift tent and barricading it with branches and debris. The ocean wind was cold, carrying the tang of salt and something else, something faintly metallic like blood. Every night it's the same, the growls, the shuffling, the distant screams. I lay awake, listening, wondering how long before the sound comes closer, or before we make a mistake. I think about the logic of it all constantly. Every route we take, every town we avoid, every building we enter, it's calculated. Stop too long and they find you. Stop too little and starvation becomes the enemy. We've had to learn this quickly, painfully. That night, Emily finally spoke. "Andrew, do you think we'll make it to the lighthouse?" I didn't answer immediately. The truth was terrifying, I didn't know. But I forced myself to speak with conviction. "Yes," I said. "We have to. It's our only chance." She nodded, and I could see a glimmer of hope in her eyes. That small spark, it's fragile, but it's enough to keep us moving. I don't know what we'll face on the way. The world outside Portland Head Light is broken, unpredictable, and merciless. But for the first time in days, I allowed myself to believe that we might actually reach the lighthouse. That maybe, just maybe, we could survive. We saw it just after sunrise. Portland Head Light rose from the cliffs like a silent sentinel, its white tower gleaming against the fog-drenched Atlantic. For a brief moment, I couldn't breathe. We had made it. Against the odds, against everything that had tried to stop us, we had made it to what felt like the last refuge in the world. The drive up the narrow, winding road to the lighthouse was tense. Every turn brought the possibility of encountering them. But there was nothing. Just the roar of the waves crashing against the cliffs below and the occasional cry of a seagull. The lighthouse seemed untouched, as if it existed in a bubble separate from the chaos that had consumed Maine. Emily's grip on my arm was tight. "It's beautiful," she whispered. I didn't respond. I was too busy scanning the perimeter, calculating vulnerabilities, imagining every way this sanctuary could fail us. We approached the keeper's house first. It was abandoned, doors creaking on rusted hinges. The windows were intact, but the interior smelled of damp wood and salt. I moved cautiously, checking every corner. Logic dictated we clear the building before claiming it as our base. Emily followed behind me, flashlight in hand, face pale but determined. Nothing. No signs of life, no blood, no them. Just empty rooms and dusty furniture. Relief was fleeting. I knew the calm was temporary. We spent the rest of the morning fortifying the lighthouse. Boards over windows, locks on doors, barricades made from the furniture we could move. Emily worked beside me, her hands shaking but steady. We found old lanterns and a stockpile of matches in the keeper's house. A storm could come at any moment and we needed light, fire, and warmth. The view from the top of the lighthouse was stunning. The Atlantic stretched endlessly, fog rolling over the water in ghostly waves. But the beauty was deceptive. From this height I could see the ocean, the cliffs, and the rocky beaches below. I knew any attempt to approach us would be visible long before they arrived. The lighthouse wasn't just a home, it was a fortress. We scavenged the surrounding area cautiously. A few abandoned boats, a small dock, and some storage sheds held minimal supplies, mostly rusted cans and old fishing gear. But the logic was simple. This was a start. We could survive here if we rationed carefully, fortified wisely, and avoided unnecessary risks. That night, as Emily slept fitfully in the keeper's quarters, I stayed awake in the lighthouse tower, watching the dark waters. I thought about the past 2 weeks, the chaos, the violence, the constant fear, and I felt a strange mixture of relief and dread. Relief that we had reached this safe place. Dread because I knew this was only the beginning. From this height I could see for miles, but the world beyond remained uncertain. Every sound, every shadow, every distant scream reminded me that survival here wouldn't be easy. It would require vigilance, logic, and the ability to make choices no one should ever have to make. I wrote it all down in a small notebook I kept in my pocket. Supplies, observations, strategies. Every day here would count. Every decision could mean life or death. Emily stirred beside me, and I felt a pang of protectiveness stronger than anything I've ever known. I promised silently that I would keep her safe no matter what. For the first time in 15 days, I allowed myself a flicker of hope. Portland Head Light was our refuge, our fortress. If we could survive here, maybe, just maybe, there was a chance to see another sunrise. But the lighthouse didn't guarantee safety. It only offered a fighting chance. And in this new world, a fighting chance was all we had. 30 days. A month since we first barricaded ourselves in Portland Head Light. It should feel like a victory, like we'd conquered the chaos outside, but it doesn't. Isolation is its own kind of terror. Days blur into each other here. The lighthouse stands tall, a fortress against the Atlantic winds and the horrors beyond, but inside, the walls close in. Emily and I have settled into a routine, rationing food, checking the perimeter, maintaining the barricades, and keeping the few lanterns we have burning at night. Every noise, every creak of the old lighthouse wood, sets our hearts racing. The logic of survival is simple. Conserve energy, ration supplies, avoid unnecessary risks. But the emotional toll is more complicated. Emily has started waking in the middle of the night, nightmares etched across her face. She whispers about shadows moving outside, about faces at the windows. I tell her it's the wind or maybe the fog playing tricks, but deep down I know her fear is real. And so is mine. Food is our constant concern. The supply we scavenged in the first week is dwindling. We've started fishing from the cliffs below and gathering rainwater in barrels, but it's never enough. Every day we calculate how long the remaining food will last. I mark each day in my notebook, a reminder of our mortality. The lighthouse is alive in its own way. The creaking of the floors, the groan of the stone walls against the wind, the occasional distant crash of waves against rocks, all of it is a constant reminder that we are not in control. We adapt, we survive, and yet the world outside has a rhythm we cannot influence. Sometimes I sit at the top of the lighthouse, looking out over the fog-shrouded Atlantic, and I wonder if anyone else is left. The towns we passed on the way here were empty or overrun. We never saw organized groups, never saw signs of resistance or rebuilding. Just silence punctuated by the occasional scream or low growl. I try to keep Emily occupied. We talk about trivial things, memories from before, stories that don't matter anymore. It's a fragile thread of normalcy, but it keeps her anchored, keeps me anchored. Without it, I don't know what either of us would become. Isolation is teaching me things I didn't want to know about myself. Fear becomes a tool, but also a weapon. Logic keeps me alive, but emotions, they make me reckless in ways I cannot always control. I am both protector and prisoner, bound to this lighthouse and to Emily's survival. At night, when the fog rolls in thick from the sea, I hear it, the shuffling, the low, guttural growls. They are out there, somewhere below, moving along the cliffs or the abandoned beaches. The lighthouse protects us physically, but it cannot shield us from what we have become. Humans stripped of society, forced to confront fear in its purest form. I checked the barricades one last time before going to bed. Every plank, every lock, every nail is a barrier between life and death. Emily sleeps, trusting me to keep her safe. I close my eyes, knowing that outside these walls, the world has ended. Inside, survival is the only law. And somewhere deep down, I fear that even here, the lighthouse may not be enough. I knew it was coming. I just didn't know when. Day 45. The lighthouse had felt safe for weeks, a fortress of stone against the chaos beyond. But tonight, the wind carried with it a new sound, a low, guttural growl that didn't belong to the ocean. It was deliberate, patient stalking. My stomach twisted as I realized we were no longer just isolated observers. They had found us. Emily stirred beside me, sensing my tension. "Andrew, what is it?" she whispered, voice trembling. "They're out there," I said quietly. "Down by the cliffs. They're moving toward the lighthouse." The logic of survival kicked in instantly. We had prepared for this, but theory is different from reality. Every plank on the doors, every barricade, every nail mattered now. I grabbed the baseball bat I'd scavenged, checking the edges of the tower windows for any vulnerability. Emily clutched a fireplace poker, trying to look brave. She wasn't. I wasn't either. It started with a single shadow at the base of the lighthouse, then another, and then dozens. They moved in packs, coordinating instinctively, drawn to sound and scent. The wind carried our presence to them, and they came with patient persistence, like predators testing a fortress before breaching it. Logic dictated that we stay inside, conserve energy, and wait for them to leave. But instinct screamed at me, if they find a weak point, even a single plank giving way, we could be overrun in seconds. The first impact came with a shattering crack, one of the lower windows. Emily screamed, and I struck the first one with the bat, knocking it back with a sickening thud. Another one slammed against the door, and I could feel the vibrations through the stone floor. "We can't hold them off forever," Emily yelled, panic creeping in. I forced myself to stay calm. "Listen to me. Stay inside the stairwell. Don't come up here unless I call." We moved like clockwork, barricading the windows, checking locks, using the height to our advantage. From above, we could see them clearly, dark forms moving deliberately, not mindless, but driven by pure instinct. I realized in that moment, their intelligence wasn't human, but it wasn't mindless either. They were hunters. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time lost all meaning. Every crash, every groan, every scratch against the wood set my nerves on fire. Emily held tight to my arm, shaking, whispering prayers I didn't understand. I didn't have time for prayers. I had time for survival. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the sounds faded. The pack had moved on, or at least retreated for now. We emerged cautiously, surveying the damage. Planks splintered, locks loosened, but we were still standing. Alive. Emily collapsed against me, sobbing quietly. "I thought we were done for," she whispered. I held her tight. "We're not. Not yet." That night, I understood something crucial. The lighthouse was more than stone and wood. It was a symbol of what we were fighting for. Safety was temporary. Vigilance was permanent. And fear was a tool we had to master, not succumb to. We repaired the barricades as best we could, using whatever materials we had. Every nail, every plank, every makeshift lock became a lifeline. Logic dictated every decision. The higher the barricade, the better our chances. The more vigilant we worked, the longer we survived. By the time we finally fell into restless sleep, I knew the truth. The world outside had already adapted, hunted, and we had to learn fast or become prey. Portland Headlight had kept us alive today. But tomorrow would be another test. 60 days. 2 full months barricaded in Portland Headlight. We were alive, but the world outside didn't care. The lighthouse kept us safe, but it also kept us isolated, and isolation was dangerous in its own way. That morning, I spotted movement on the cliffs below. At first, I thought it was a trick of the fog, a shadow cast by a rock or drifting clouds. But then I saw them, humans. Real people, not the infected. They were ragged, gaunt, desperate. Their clothes were torn, their eyes darting as if expecting predators at every turn. Emily froze beside me. "What do we do?" she whispered. Her voice was small, fragile. I didn't answer immediately. This was a problem I hadn't fully prepared for. Logic dictated caution. We didn't know if they were friendly, armed, or infected. But they were moving closer, making it obvious they were aware of our presence. I motioned for Emily to stay behind the barricades while I observed them through the binoculars. There were 3 of them, 2 men, 1 woman. They carried backpacks and sticks fashioned into crude weapons. They looked as tired and hungry as we were. But desperation makes people unpredictable. After a tense hour, I decided to signal them. I built a small fire on the lower platform, carefully controlled, smoke minimal, and waved a white cloth. The fire drew their attention immediately. One of the men raised a hand in what I hoped was a gesture of peace. Logic dictated we still stay cautious. We couldn't afford mistakes. I called down in a loud, steady voice, "We mean you no harm. Stay where you are." The humans hesitated, then approached slowly, keeping to the shadows. When they reached the bottom of the cliff path, I climbed down cautiously, keeping my bat ready. Emily stayed at the top, watching our exchange, tense and ready to retreat. The first words they spoke were desperate, clipped. "Food. Water. Shelter. Please?" The woman's voice cracked, tears streaking her dirt-smudged face. I nodded slowly. "We have limited supplies, but we can help you. One at a time. Be honest with me, no lies, no tricks." They agreed, though I could see the tension in their eyes. I knew the survival logic all too well. Trust could kill you. But I also knew this: humanity had value even in the apocalypse. If we abandoned empathy entirely, we lost something essential. We brought them inside the lighthouse cautiously, one at a time. Every corner checked, every window and door monitored. I noticed Emily stiffen at the newcomers, uncertainty in her gaze. This wasn't just fear, it was fear for us, for our fragile existence. Over the next few hours, we rationed food, filled empty water bottles, and listened to their story. They were from Portland, like us, caught in the chaos, surviving however they could. It was a sobering reminder: the virus didn't just take lives, it forced morality into survival, forced decisions that should never have been necessary. By nightfall, they were quiet, resting in makeshift cots. Emily finally allowed herself to relax slightly. "They're like us," she whispered. "Just trying to survive." I nodded, though the logical part of me remained alert. Trust is dangerous, but so is isolation. This world was teaching me that survival isn't just about avoiding death. It's about navigating the dangerous gray area between fear and empathy, between logic and instinct. That night, I wrote in my notebook, "Survivors are unpredictable. They may be allies or liabilities. We must remain vigilant but not lose ourselves completely. Isolation saves lives, but humanity preserves them." Portland Headlight remained our fortress, but now it carried a new risk: humans. Outside threats weren't just monsters. Sometimes they wore familiar faces. And sometimes, survival required choices we might never forgive ourselves for. 90 days. 3 months trapped in Portland Headlight, and the reality had begun to settle in like a weight pressing on my chest. Supplies were running dangerously low. Every can of beans, every bottle of water, every scrap of dried fish had to be accounted for. We had rationed carefully from the beginning, but this was the moment I had feared: scarcity. Logic dictates that preparation is survival. I had gone through our stores multiple times, calculating what we had left and how long it would last. Even with careful rationing, we had barely enough for another 2 weeks. After that, hunger would become as dangerous as the infected outside. Emily noticed it first. Her hands trembled slightly as she sorted cans, counting them over and over. "Andrew, we won't have enough," she whispered. Her eyes were wide, haunted. I didn't answer. Words wouldn't help. Only action would. I had to think. Fishing trips alone weren't enough. Rainwater had limits. We needed to scavenge. The cliffs and beaches surrounding the lighthouse had small amounts of debris, driftwood, some old crates, perhaps a hidden stash of food from past visitors. But venturing outside meant risk. Logic dictated a careful plan. That morning I crafted a route, plotting a path along the cliffs where the infected were least likely to reach us. I armed myself with a bat, a hunting knife, and the small flare gun we had found in the keeper's house. Emily refused to come. "I can't, Andrew. Not today." I didn't argue. She had stayed too long inside and I needed her alive. The outside world was worse than I remembered. Towns along the coast were gutted, their streets littered with abandoned cars and broken signs. Occasionally, a pack of infected roamed the streets. I kept to the shadows, moving quickly and quietly, eyes scanning constantly for movement. I found a small convenience store partially intact, its door hanging on broken hinges. Inside there were a few cans of food, a dusty crate of bottled water, and some fishing nets. I loaded what I could carry, careful not to make too much noise. Every step was a risk. Every sound could draw attention. Returning to the lighthouse, I felt the weight of what scarcity had done to us. Hunger sharpens fear, and fear sharpens instinct. Emily's eyes lit up when I returned with supplies, but I could see the toll this constant struggle had taken on both of us. We were surviving, but at what cost? We ate sparingly that night, sharing a small portion of canned beans. Every bite was a reminder that nothing was guaranteed anymore. Logic dictated conservation, but emotions reminded me that life itself, no matter how small or meager, was worth holding on to. I wrote in my notebook, "Scarcity forces choices. Choices shape character." Survival is more than avoiding death. It's managing fear, hunger, and the fragile remnants of humanity. The lighthouse felt colder that night. The wind was sharper, the shadows longer. I sat by the window watching the fog roll across the Atlantic, thinking of the people we had left behind, of towns swallowed by silence. Scarcity was more than a lack of food or water. It was the constant reminder that the world we had known was gone, and that every day we survived here was a day stolen from inevitability. Emily's hand found mine. "We'll make it," she whispered, though I could hear the uncertainty behind her words. I squeezed her hand back, offering comfort I didn't fully feel myself. Logic and hope, intertwined like threads holding us together against the unraveling world. Tomorrow I would plan another foray. Tomorrow I would calculate, strategize, and prepare. Scarcity wouldn't wait. Hunger didn't negotiate. And neither would the infected lurking beyond our fortress walls. Day 120. 3 months and 3 weeks since we barricaded ourselves in Portland Head Light. I thought we had seen everything the world could throw at us. I was wrong. The storm came suddenly, rolling in from the Atlantic like a living, malevolent force. Winds shredded the fog, sending icy rain lashing against the lighthouse walls. The ocean rose angrily, waves smashing against the cliffs with a violence I had never witnessed. Logic told me the lighthouse could withstand it. It had weathered centuries of storms, but instinct screamed that this one was different. Emily and I moved quickly, reinforcing the weaker boards, securing the shutters, and dragging extra furniture against the doors. The wind screamed like 1,000 voices, rattling the windows and shaking the stone walls. Every crash of a wave felt like an assault on our fragile sanctuary. And then I heard it, a sound beneath the roar of the storm. A shuffling, scraping noise from the cliffs below. The infected. They had been drawn by the wind, by the smell of us, by the noise of our frantic preparations. The storm had no effect on them. They moved with grim determination, climbing and scrambling along the rocks, desperate for any sign of life. Emily clung to me, whispering prayers I didn't share. Logic told me to stay calm, to think clearly, but the combination of wind, rain, and the sounds from below frayed my nerves. I could feel the lighthouse shudder under each impact of a wave, and I realized with a cold certainty, if this storm destroyed the barricades, we could be done for. We spent hours fighting the elements. Boards ripped free, windows cracked, and water seeped in through the roof. I used every nail, every piece of furniture, every ounce of strength to hold the fortress together. Emily worked beside me, soaked to the bone, her face pale but resolute. Neither of us spoke much. Words were useless. Survival required focus, endurance, and a clear mind, even when everything inside screamed panic. At the storm's peak, lightning illuminated the cliffs in jagged bursts. In those moments I saw them clearly, dozens of infected, silhouetted against the ocean spray, moving like shadows in a nightmare. My heart raced. Logic dictated patience. Panic dictated action. I chose both. I hurled makeshift barricades and shouted, keeping them at bay as best I could. When the storm finally subsided, we were battered, exhausted, and soaked to the bone. But we had survived. The lighthouse still stood, though battered and leaking in places. We sat on the floor, shivering, holding each other in silence. The storm had tested us, tested the fortress, and tested the fragile thread of hope that still kept us alive. I realized something crucial. The lighthouse is more than stone and wood. It is a symbol of resilience, of human determination in the face of chaos. But symbols cannot protect you from fatigue, fear, or hunger. Only vigilance, preparation, and a refusal to surrender can. That night, as Emily finally slept beside me, I wrote in my notebook, "Nature is indifferent. The storm does not choose. Survival is not granted. It is earned, moment by moment, breath by breath." I stared out at the Atlantic, waves still raging but calmer now, and knew that the world outside would continue to test us. Every storm, every pack of infected, every scarcity, these are the rules now. And if we fail to respect them, the lighthouse, our sanctuary, will become a tomb. 135 days. Almost 5 months. And I had thought the worst of the storm was behind us. I was wrong. Life inside Portland Head Light had been tense but manageable. Emily and I had our routines, our small victories, and the occasional scavenging trip that kept hope alive. Then came the newcomers, the 3 survivors we had cautiously let in weeks ago. At first they were quiet, cooperative, and careful. But survival changes people. Scarcity, fear, and desperation twist even the best intentions. It started subtly. Extra rations disappearing, tools misplaced, small signs that something wasn't right. I confronted one of them, a man named Carl, about a missing bottle of water. His response was defensive, jittery, and evasive. Logic told me to monitor him, to watch the group closely. But human intuition, the instinct we all try to suppress, warned me of something worse. Then it happened. I was in the tower, keeping watch as usual, when I heard the noise, a plank scraping against the outer barricade, faint but deliberate. My heart froze. I ran downstairs and saw Carl, crouched low, signaling to someone outside. Not the infected, another human. A scavenger or raider trying to breach our sanctuary. Betrayal. Emily was behind me, panic in her eyes. "Andrew, what is he doing?" "Trying to get them in," I said through gritted teeth. "He's trying to bring them here." Logic dictated immediate action. I grabbed my bat and confronted Carl before he could open the door. He froze, but desperation made him reckless. Words failed, survival instincts took over. He lunged. I struck him with the bat hard and he collapsed unconscious. Emily screamed, and I realized in that moment that moral clarity was a luxury we no longer had. The other two survivors, Janet and Leo, had no idea what was happening. I explained the situation, keeping my voice calm but firm. If we let outsiders in, if we trust the wrong person, we all die. Janet's eyes were wide, horrified. Leo nodded, too afraid to speak. Logic and survival had become the only language that mattered. Betrayal wasn't just a threat, it was a lesson. Trust is precious. But in this world it can also be lethal. We restrained Carl, tying him in the keeper's house and monitoring him closely. He raved about desperation, survival, and necessity, but I knew better. Logic must govern action. Survival requires vigilance, not sentimentality. That night, I wrote in my notebook, "Betrayal is inevitable when fear outweighs morality. Humans are unpredictable. Trust is a tool and a weapon. Every decision carries weight. Every mistake may be fatal." Emily stayed close, shivering, her trust in humanity shaken. I held her tight, silently vowing to protect her no matter what. Betrayal had shown us how fragile our sanctuary really was, and how quickly the rules could change. The lighthouse is still our fortress, but it is fragile and weighs stone and wood cannot defend. The real threat isn't just the infected, it's us. It's the human instinct to survive at all costs, even when it destroys those around us. Tomorrow we would face another test. I didn't know if we would survive it. But I knew this. Logic, vigilance, and ruthlessness were now as necessary as the walls that kept the infected at bay. Day 150. 5 months. And yet, the lighthouse no longer felt like a sanctuary, it was a cage. Supplies were running dangerously low again. The storm had destroyed some of the rainwater barrels, and our rations were nearly gone. Emily was exhausted, her strength waning. Logic dictated that I could not stay idle. Survival demanded action. I packed lightly for the trip beyond the cliffs. A backpack with a few cans, a flashlight, the flare gun, and my hunting knife. Emily protested, but I shook my head. "I have to do this," I said. "We can't survive by waiting. I need to find more supplies or we'll starve." The cliffs were treacherous. Fog clung to the rocks, the Atlantic roared below, and every step required balance, concentration, and calculation. But survival is about risk management, not fear. Every movement was deliberate. Every sound analyzed. The infected roamed below, but logic gave me a path. Higher ground, minimal noise, direct route to abandoned areas. I made my way to the small town of Fort Williams, just north of the lighthouse. Normally, it's a tourist area, peaceful, with trails and historic buildings. Today it was a graveyard. Cars overturned, windows shattered, the faint stench of decay lingering in the air. I moved carefully, searching abandoned stores, homes, and sheds. Food, water, anything. I found a small convenience store partially intact, canned goods scattered but salvageable. My relief was short-lived. A low growl echoed from a corner. I froze, scanning the shadows. 2 infected shuffled toward me, their eyes black voids of hunger. Logic dictated caution and instinct screamed survival. I used a heavy plank as a barrier, then struck them swiftly with the bat. One fell, the other retreated into the shadows. I collected what I could carry and began the journey back. Every step was tense, every shadow a potential threat. I thought of Emily, of the lighthouse, of our fragile survival. The weight of responsibility pressed down on me. Logic had brought me this far, but instinct would determine if I returned. Returning to the lighthouse was no less dangerous. The cliffs were slick with fog, rocks unstable, and the infected persistent. But I pressed forward, keeping low, moving slowly, relying on the path I had memorized. The fog played tricks on my mind, turning shadows into threats, but I couldn't afford hesitation. When I finally reached Portland Head Light, exhausted and drenched, Emily ran to meet me. Her relief was palpable, her fear mixing with hope. I handed her the supplies, noting the slight tremor in her hands. Survival was never just physical, it was emotional. Every day spent here tested not only our bodies but our minds, our hearts. That night I wrote in my notebook, "Going beyond is necessary. Logic guides us, but instinct saves us. Every trip into the world outside risks death, but without it, survival is impossible. The lighthouse may be a fortress, but life exists beyond its walls." We sat together, listening to the ocean, the fog rolling over the cliffs. The lighthouse still protected us, but the world outside continued to challenge us. And I knew that sooner or later, we would be forced to confront not just the infected, but the choices, the dangers, and the moral dilemmas that survival demanded. Day 170. Nearly 6 months since the world ended. I should have felt relief returning from my scavenging trip, victory in supplies secured, another step toward survival, but something was wrong. Emily was gone. At first, I thought she was in the top of the lighthouse tower, maybe looking out at the ocean, lost in thought. But the stairs were empty. Her makeshift bed in the keeper's quarters was undisturbed. Panic hit me like a physical blow. I called her name, my voice echoing through the empty lighthouse. Only silence answered. Logic, the part of me that had kept us alive for months, kicked in immediately. She didn't wander off on her own. She wouldn't. That left 2 possibilities, the infected or another human. But I'd left no one else in the lighthouse while I scavenged. I searched the perimeter, checking the cliffs, the beaches, the storage sheds. Nothing. No sign of struggle, no blood, no footprints, only the lingering sense of absence, like a void pressing against my chest. My mind raced. The world outside our fortress was unpredictable. Trust is fragile. Isolation teaches fear. And now I had to confront both. Logic dictated caution. I couldn't rush blindly into the foggy cliffs or the rocks below. I armed myself, bat, knife, flare gun, and began a systematic search. Every shadow, every rock, every abandoned shed was a potential hiding place, or a death trap. Hours passed. Panic warred with reason. Every instinct screamed to run blindly, to call for her, to chase shadows. But experience had taught me that haste could be fatal. I moved deliberately, calculating every risk. The infected were still out there, drawn by sound, scent, and movement. Any mistake could cost me everything. I found small clues, her scarf caught on a jagged rock, a handprint in the mud, but they led nowhere concrete. My chest tightened with guilt. I should have been there. I should have noticed something. Survival had been my priority, but now, if she was lost, I might have failed the most important mission of all. By nightfall, I returned to the lighthouse, empty-handed and exhausted. I barricaded the doors, every sound outside making me jump. I sat in the tower, flashlight in hand, staring out into the foggy Atlantic, grappling with fear, guilt, and hopelessness. The lighthouse had protected us from the infected, from storms, from scarcity, but it could not shield me from the consequences of isolation. I wrote in my notebook, "Isolation teaches hard truths. Even in safety, the world outside finds a way to punish mistakes. Every absence, every silence, every unknown is a test of endurance, reason, and humanity." That night I barely slept. Every creak of the lighthouse, every gust of wind, every distant growl reminded me that Emily might be out there, alone, vulnerable. Logic could only take me so far. Beyond that, all I had was fear, hope, and the desperate drive to survive and find her. The lighthouse had been our sanctuary, but now it felt like a cage. And I realized for the first time that survival might not be enough. Sometimes survival demands more than strength and vigilance. It demands courage, sacrifice, and the willingness to face the unknown. Day 180. 6 months in the lighthouse, and for the first time, I realized that survival was no longer just about rationing, vigilance, or strategy. It was about combat. The horde came without warning. Fog rolled in thick from the Atlantic, muffling the usual sounds of the cliffs and the waves. At first, I thought it was a storm, but then I heard it, The low, guttural growls multiplied 100-fold, rising from the beaches below. My stomach dropped. They had found us. Emily was at the top of the tower, scanning the fog through binoculars. "Andrew, it's so many," she whispered, her voice trembling. I didn't answer. Words were useless. I moved quickly, securing every barricade, checking weapons, and preparing for the inevitable assault. Logic dictated action. Panic would be fatal. I positioned planks, reinforced doors, and barricaded weak points with furniture. Every window was secured, every gap was filled. Emily moved beside me, carrying the flare gun and a knife, her determination masking terror. Survival demanded we act as one. The horde surged closer. Shadows emerged from the fog, dozens, then hundreds, their black eyes reflecting hunger and instinct. They attacked the lower barricades first, fists and claws pounding, snapping wood, rattling stone. The lighthouse shuddered under the assault. I fought at the front, bats swinging, knocking one back after another. Logic dictated conserve energy, but instinct demanded aggression. Emily fired the flare gun, the light and noise scattering some of them, buying us precious seconds. Every strike, every movement, every breath counted. Ours felt like days. The horde was relentless. They tested our defenses, found weaknesses, and returned. My arms ached, my body trembled, but retreat was not an option. Logic dictated that we hold the high ground. Fight or flight, but there was nowhere to flee. At one point a plank gave way. One of the infected surged inside. Emily screamed and I swung, hitting it with all my strength. It fell, but the reminder was clear. One mistake could be fatal. Finally, as dawn broke, the horde receded, driven back by fatigue, light, and the natural tide of instinct. The lighthouse was battered, splintered wood, cracked windows, shattered barriers, but it stood. We were alive. Emily sank to the floor, exhausted, and I held her. "We made it," she whispered. Her voice was hoarse, but relief and fear intertwined in every syllable. I sat in the tower afterward, surveying the damage. The fight had shown us the truth. Survival was no longer passive. The world outside was no longer just a threat in shadows. It was an active force, testing our strategies, courage, and endurance. I wrote in my notebook, "Fight or flight is not a choice. It is the rule of this world. Strength, logic, and courage are the only weapons. Failure is fatal. Survival demands vigilance, adaptability, and relentless action." The lighthouse had protected us, but it had also taught us a brutal truth. Safety is temporary. The world outside is patient, relentless, and unforgiving. And so are we if we intend to survive. Day 190. 10 days after the horde attacked Portland Head Light. The lighthouse still stands, but so much else has been stripped away. Comfort, hope, and a sense of normalcy we had clung to. We spent the day repairing the damage. Splintered wood, cracked windows, and weakened barricades demanded constant attention. Each repair was exhausting physically and mentally, but it was necessary. Logic dictates that the fortress must be maintained. Survival depends on it. Yet the cost of survival is not only measured in wood and stone. Emily is quieter now, haunted by what we endured. I see it in the way she flinches at shadows, the way her hands tremble when she touches a weapon. And I am not untouched. My dreams are fractured, visions of the horde, of the cliff's edge, of the infected reaching in and taking everything from us. Sleep is a luxury I can no longer afford. We found Carl's body outside the lighthouse, pinned between rocks along the cliffs. He had tried to escape, but the horde had claimed him. Betrayal, desperation, and miscalculation had cost him his life. It was a harsh reminder that survival requires more than strength. It requires constant vigilance, foresight, and the willingness to act decisively. I rationed our supplies again, calculating what we had left. Food, water, and fuel were scarce. Every decision mattered. Every misstep could be fatal. Emily and I discussed strategies, contingency plans, and potential escape routes, even though the cliffs and the Atlantic offered little hope beyond the lighthouse walls. That night, the fog rolled in thick, and the waves crashed angrily against the cliffs. I sat in the tower watching, thinking. Survival has a cost. It exacts more than physical exhaustion. It erodes innocence, fractures trust, and shapes who we become. I realized that in this world, the lighthouse does not simply protect us from the infected. It protects us from becoming them, but only barely. Emily came up to join me, shivering from the cold. I wrapped my arms around her. "We're still here?" I whispered. "Yes," she said, voice trembling. "But at what cost, Andrew? How long can we keep this up?" I had no answer. Logic and instinct can preserve life, but they cannot erase the emotional toll, the fear, or the constant shadow of mortality. Every day, every decision, every breath carries weight. The cost of survival is measured not only in lives saved but in humanity tested, hope stretched, and the knowledge that the world we knew is gone forever. I wrote in my notebook, "Survival has a price. Every victory is paid for with exhaustion, fear, and the erosion of normalcy. Humanity is fragile. Isolation is a teacher. The lighthouse shelters us from the world, but it cannot shield us from the consequences of surviving it." That night, we slept fitfully, knowing that tomorrow the world would test us again. The horde may retreat, storms may pass, and supplies may run low, but survival demands vigilance, courage, and the relentless will to endure. And every day that cost grows heavier. Day 199. Almost 200 days. Almost 200 days of fear, rationing, vigilance, and the slow erosion of what it means to be human. Portland Head Light still stands, battered, scarred, but unyielding. Emily and I are still alive, but the world outside has changed beyond recognition. The horde returned at dawn. Not a few scattered infected, but hundreds, perhaps more. The fog rolled in thick from the Atlantic, concealing their numbers until they surged forward with terrifying coordination. I could see them from the tower, moving over the cliffs like shadows, their guttural growls a chorus of inevitable death. Emily gripped my arm. "Andrew, we can't hold them." Logic kicked in immediately. We had prepared for this, barricades, weapons, makeshift traps, flares, but this was different. This was the culmination of everything we had survived, the ultimate test. We fought. Every plank, every nail, every swing of the bat counted. Emily fired flares into the fog, illuminating the horde and buying us precious seconds. I defended the lower barricades, striking any infected that came close. Hours passed, or minutes, time lost all meaning. The wind, the rain, the screams, the pounding of waves against cliffs, it all blurred into a nightmare of survival. At one point, a section of the lower barricade gave way. A surge of infected reached inside. Emily screamed. Logic screamed. Instinct screamed. I struck them down, one by one, using every ounce of strength and desperation I possessed. We realized we could not survive by defense alone. Logic dictated a risky countermeasure. I set fire to a small cache of debris outside the lighthouse, creating a wall of flames. The horde hesitated, slowed by instinctual fear of fire, and we used the moment to reinforce the barricades and regroup. Hours passed. Exhaustion clawed at every fiber of my being. Emily collapsed beside me, soaked, trembling, but alive. We had survived the onslaught, but barely. The lighthouse was scarred, splintered, and leaking, but it stood just as we had. In the aftermath, silence returned. Only the ocean remained constant. I held Emily, both of us shivering, exhausted, and emotionally raw. Nearly 200 days of survival had brought us here, alive but forever changed. I wrote in my notebook, hands shaking, "The lighthouse is more than stone. It is resilience. It is logic, vigilance, and courage made tangible. Survival has a cost, fear, exhaustion, and humanity, but here we endure. Here we are not broken." Emily looked up at me, tears streaking her face. "We made it," she whispered. "Yes," I said, voice hoarse. "We made it." but only because we fought, planned, and survived. And only because we never gave up. Outside, the Atlantic raged and the fog drifted across the cliffs. The world may have ended, but in the lighthouse, we had carved a sliver of hope, a fragile, human, unyielding hope. And as night fell, I realized something profound. Survival is not just about living. It is about enduring, about facing fear, about making impossible choices, and about holding on to humanity even when the world demands its abandonment. Portland Head Light had been our sanctuary, our fortress, and our teacher. And after 199 days of relentless fear, terror, and survival, Emily and I remained together, standing against the darkness. We were alive. And that, in this world, was everything.